This is Marta from Ruby Soup from Pearl Juice, and today I am bringing you all a vlog review of the Japanese movie Radiance that premiered in 2017. This movie was directed by a indie darling director called Naomi Kawase. It has kind of been marketed as a romance film, but it's not quite. I'll get into that a little bit later. But basically, the plot follows two people. One is a photographer called Nakamori. He is, at the beginning of the movie, partially blind, and his condition kind of grows as the film progresses. And then we have Misako, who, now I don't quite know what the term would be, but basically her job is that she works on doing a narration of films for the visually impaired, as well as that she is dealing with her mother who has Alzheimer's disease. The film basically starts with that Nakamori is one of the people that are test subjects, while Misako is working on a script for a film, and the film she is working on is a fictional film. That's how they meet and how they start bonding, and the film just takes off from there. Now, if we're going to begin with the pros, well, as I mentioned before, there is a movie inside of this movie. And while some people might think that that's a bit of an overused trope, I think that's done really well in this film. Because it serves a purpose, for one. There's an actual purpose for this film inside of the film to exist. As well as the fact that Misako's job being that she's working on this narration for the visually impaired, then it raises all these questions about able-bodied privilege and disability and how people that are able-bodied treat disabled people and unintentional condescending and such, and raises these kinds of questions about how we view art and how we interpret art. For instance, Misako, in order to try and improve her writing of the script, then she meets the director of the movie and they talk about the last scene. And Misako has a very different interpretation than what the director has. And first, the director is very much like saying that you have misinterpreted my work. But then he later actually says to her that, well, I actually appreciate that my movie kind of fills you with hope. It's kind of showing the conflict between two schools of thoughts, which is the death of the author, and then the people that believe that author intent is always a thing and you have to consider that to a T. There's also the fact that, for instance, when Misako is doing the narration for the testing audience, then she often unintentionally becomes very condescending and actually is not really talking to the people that she's supposedly doing this narration for, like how they experience things. Nakamori very early on in the film says to her that, you know, you impose your own ideas and views of the film onto the narration, and you should try to think about the fact that when we experience movies, that we also like to have a little bit more room for personal interpretation or for things to be ambiguous if the director has meant them to be. That was really interesting how they talked about that Misako unintentionally is being very condescending, even if she's actually trying to help. There's also a scene where a blind woman who is one of the test subjects, she says to Misako that, well, you know, we experience films very differently because the sounds and the music and such, then we immerse ourselves into the film and we're almost like living in the film. Continuing on that, I actually really liked how Nakamori, how his story was unfolded. Now I will say this, that I don't have a physical disability, so I don't know how accurate the representation in this film is. If anybody could have any reflections on that, you can comment down below. I would actually like to hear that point of view. In my opinion, Nakamori's story is actually very heartbreaking because he's a photographer and he eventually has to grapple with the fact that he can't really do photography anymore. I actually interpreted that you could see this as a universal concept of when all of a sudden you've been doing something that you love for a really long time, but then something happens in your life and you have to deal with shifting your identity. To go more to the disability presentation, there's a lot of scenes where even Nakamori's own friends treat him very badly because of his disability, and it's really heartbreaking. And I actually really liked it that this film showed that there are people that are really ableist and are very disrespectful of people with disabilities. That is also one sphere of identity that when we talk about social justice, we tend to forget this aspect. The storyline with Misako and her mother doesn't really get all that fleshed out, and because Misako already has a storyline where she's trying to do the script, and then it's very hard to keep focus on both of these storylines as the film is going on. The two actors who play Nakamori and Misako, they actually have incredible chemistry. It's really, really good. Like the most that they do in this movie is that they kiss. But even like that is like so heated that it is kind of like, oh. Nakamori pushes a little bit back at Misako for being condescending, but then at some point she also really respects him for his photography, and they bond over this similar interest in photography. It's very sweet without being sappy. And now the con side of this is that, as I mentioned, there's already quite a lot of other things in the movie that the romance gets a little bit cut short, and I would have actually liked it to have a little bit more focus there. So that was all of my thoughts on Radiance. Have any of you seen this movie? I would love to hear your thoughts. Comment down below. Let's get a conversation started. If you like this video, click the like button, subscribe, and I'll see you all later. Bye-bye!